What if I told you Native Americans had fruits healthier than apples, stronger than corn, and sweeter than sugar? You've never tasted most of them. Here are 15 forgotten fruits native foragers harvested that need to come back, and the last entry is unbelievable. 15. Bearberry. Imagine a tough little berry growing where almost nothing else survives, across the Arctic tundra, rocky mountainsides, and northern pine forests. That's the bearberry, named because bears love to gorge on them before hibernation. But for native peoples, this plant was far more than wildlife food. Tribes like the Cree, Ojibwe, and Inuit gathered its small, bright red fruits not for sweetness, they're actually mealy and bland, but for medicine and survival. The berries were dried, ground, and mixed into stews, or combined with fat to make portable trail food. Archaeologists have found traces of bearberry seeds in storage pits dating back centuries, proving its importance. But the leaves? They might have been even more valuable. Rich in compounds like arbutin, they were dried and smoked in kinnikinnick, a ceremonial tobacco mixture shared during councils and rituals. Bearberry tea was also a go-to remedy. It was used to treat kidney and bladder infections long before modern antibiotics. Knowledge that later influenced European herbal medicine. Even today, Uva ursi, Latin for bear's grape, appears in herbal pharmacies across the world. One could say bearberry was less about flavor and more about function, a survival fruit that kept both body and spirit alive. 14. Wild plum picture. Entire thickets glowing with small red to yellow plums, each no bigger than a walnut but bursting with tangy juice. The wild plum once stretched across North America, from the Great Plains to the East Coast. Archaeologists have found carbonized plum pits in prehistoric fire pits dating back over 1,000 years, proving just how long native peoples valued them. Plains tribes like the Lakota and Omaha gathered bushels in late summer, drying the fruit or boiling it down into thick preserves. One favorite recipe? Mixing dried plums with buffalo fat and meat, creating a pemmican variant both tart and energizing. These weren't snacks, they were survival fuel, rich in vitamin C and natural sugars. Wild plums also played a role in diplomacy. Sharing fruit wine or dried plums at intertribal councils symbolized hospitality and good faith. Some villages even planted plum thickets deliberately as natural barriers, living walls of food and defense. Today, wild plums survive mostly in hedgerows and forgotten corners of farmland, often overlooked compared to commercial varieties. Yet once they were everywhere, a fruit that fed families, flavored ceremonies, and sweetened survival itself. 13. Mulberry. Imagine kids climbing trees with purple-stained hands and faces. That's how mulberries lived in memory. The red mulberry, native to eastern North America, once stretched from Florida to Ontario. Its berries, small and sweet, were eaten fresh, dried, or fermented. Indigenous groups like the Cherokee, Choctaw, and Delaware relied on mulberries as both food and medicine. The fruit, rich in vitamin C and iron, helped prevent scurvy during long winters. Dried mulberries were ground into flour and added to cornbread, while the bark and sap were used to treat stomach ailments. Historians note that mulberries were also vital for survival journeys. Hunters could carry dried berries that stayed edible for months. Lightweight yet energizing. A cup of mulberries contains about 60 calories and more antioxidants than cranberries. No wonder they became a trail food of choice. Even the leaves weren't wasted. They fed silkworms. Early European settlers briefly dreamed of launching a silk industry in the colonies using native mulberry trees. Though that failed, the fruit remained popular in wild diets until supermarkets shifted focus to apples and grapes. Today, native mulberries are often dismissed as messy yard trees. But once they were a fruit of life, health, and trade. 12. Buffalo berry. On the northern plains where winters hit minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, the buffalo berry grew like a survivor's secret. Small, tart red or orange berries dangled from thorny shrubs, often ignored today but once vital for Lakota, Mandan, and Cree. These berries aren't just sour, they're nutritional powerhouses. Rich in vitamin C, carotenoids, and antioxidants, they helped prevent scurvy long before Europeans even knew the word. One handful of buffalo berries carries more antioxidants than blueberries. Tribes mixed them into pemmican, blending fat, dried meat, and berries into high-energy travel food that could last months without spoiling. But buffalo berries also had cultural meaning. The Mandan fermented them into a foamy drink called Indian ice cream. Beaten with snow or water, the tart fruit whipped into a frothy treat often served during ceremonies. Imagine a soda-like dessert in 1600. Centuries before Coca-Cola, even wildlife depended on them. Bison and elk browsed the shrubs, while birds spread seeds across the plains. That's why they're called buffalo berries, growing where the great herds once roamed. Today they're nearly forgotten, though scientists are studying them as climate-hardy crops for the future. 11. Cranberries weren't invented for Thanksgiving. They were survival food long before colonists arrived. Indigenous nations across the Great Lakes, New England and Canada relied on them as medicine, food, and trade goods. These small, tart red berries grew in bogs where few crops could thrive. Rich in vitamin C, manganese, and antioxidants, cranberries helped prevent infections and stomach illness. Tribes like the Ojibwe and Wampanoag mixed cranberries into pemmican with venison and fat, making high-energy rations that could last an entire winter. But cranberries weren't only food, they were pharmacy. The juice treated wounds and infections, while dried berries were chewed for fevers. Early European settlers adopted these remedies, noting their unusual ability to prevent scurvy on long sea voyages. By the 1700s, barrels of wild cranberries were shipped to Europe as valuable cargo. Their economic role grew too. By the 1800s, indigenous harvesting skills laid the foundation for the cranberry trade we know today. Families raked bogs and collected bushels, which sold in growing towns. What's striking is how cranberries carried both survival and economy, bridging native traditions with global trade. Yet wild bogs, once endless, are now rare, and cultivated cranberries dominate store shelves. 10. Wild persimmon. If you've ever bitten a green persimmon, you'd never forget it. The fruit makes your mouth pucker so tight it feels glued shut. But once ripe, wild persimmons turn sweet like dates, a survival treasure across the American Southeast. Cherokee, Choctaw, and Creek families harvested them every autumn, waiting until frost softened the fruits. A single tree could drop 50 to 75 pounds of fruit in a season. Persimmons were mashed into loaves, sun-dried, and stored for months, becoming winter rations. Some tribes even brewed them into a tart beer-like drink. Persimmons carried health benefits too. They're rich in vitamin C, fiber, and antioxidants, strengthening immunity during cold months. Early settlers learned quickly. Records from 1607 Jamestown describe native guides offering persimmons as both food and medicine. Persimmon wood also had value. It's one of the hardest native hardwoods, later used in golf clubs and tools. So both fruit and tree were survival assets. Today, wild persimmons are rare on store shelves, overshadowed by Asian varieties. But for native peoples, they were autumn's golden prize, worth the wait. 9. Saskatoon berry sweet, purple, and slightly nutty. Saskatoon berries were the Plains tribe's answer to energy bars. Also called service berries, they ripened in midsummer, covering bushes in clusters. For Cree, Blackfoot, and Métis, Saskatoons were more than snacks. They were pemmican's secret ingredient. Mixed with dried bison meat and fat, these berries gave both flavor and shelf life. One pemmican bag weighing 90 pounds could feed a warrior for weeks, fueled by Saskatoon's sugar and nutrients. Nutritionally, Saskatoon berries outshine blueberries. They're packed with more fiber, higher iron, and double the calcium, crucial for bone strength. Their antioxidants rival modern superfoods, helping with heart health and immunity. But they weren't only survival food. They were cultural currency. Women dried bushels on hides, trading them at summer gatherings. Archaeologists have found Saskatoon seeds in storage pits dating back over 3,000 years, showing just how long they fed people. The name Saskatoon comes from the Cree word Missasquattomina. That word later gave its name to the Canadian city Saskatoon, proof of the berry's legacy. Even now, in parts of Canada, families still harvest Saskatoons every summer, a tradition linking modern kitchens to ancient camps. 8. Bunchberry. At first glance, bunchberry looks too small to matter. Tiny red fruits growing close to the forest floor in northern woodlands. But to Cree, Ojibwe, and other First Nations, these berries were survival gems hidden under the pines. Cree children gave it the playful name itchy chin berry because rubbing the fruit juice on the skin sometimes caused a harmless itch. But eaten properly, bunchberries offered light sweetness, a mild taste, and enough energy to get through long days of travel. Families gathered handfuls and dried them on birch bark sheets. While not as calorie-heavy as nuts or meat, bunchberries had an advantage. They grew in huge mats. A single patch could yield thousands of berries, covering the forest floor like red jewels. They're loaded with vitamin C, a lifesaver against scurvy and harsh winters. Archaeological digs in Canada found dried bunchberry remains in storage pits over 1,000 years old, proof they were part of long-term diets. In some places, they were boiled into stews, mixed with fish oil, or stored for winter in woven pouches. They may not be famous today, but in the far north, bunchberries were quiet guardians against hunger and sickness. 7. Choke cherry. Choke cherries got their name for a reason. Bite one raw and unripe, and the astringency dries your mouth like sandpaper. Yet native nations turned this tricky fruit into a food cornerstone. Lakota, Dakota, and Cheyenne tribes harvested vast amounts each summer. Women crushed whole cherries, pits, skin, and all, then shaped them into cakes. Drying under the sun, these cakes could last for months. When mixed into pemmican with bison fat and meat, choke cherries transformed into a high-energy survival meal. Nutritionally, they were lifesavers. Choke cherries provide vitamins A and C, potassium, and fiber. Even the ground pits contain cyanogenic compounds that, when processed correctly, released extra nutrients without poisoning. Elders knew exactly how to balance risk and reward. Beyond food, choke cherries carried spiritual weight. Branches were used in sweat lodges and teas from the bark treated coughs and fevers. Archaeologists have traced choke cherry use back over 4,000 years, making it one of North America's oldest continuous food traditions. Early settlers also relied on them. Records show chokecherry wine and syrups being made across the frontier. What began as a survival fruit became a bridge between native tradition and settler kitchens. 6. Blue huckleberry. Imagine a blueberry, but wilder, darker, and bursting with history. That's the blue huckleberry. Native to the acidic soils of the eastern U.S., these berries fed both people and animals for centuries. Deer, bears, and birds all competed with humans for the juicy drupes, and native tribes like the Cherokee and Iroquois harvested them by the basket. Huckleberries were more than snacks. They were dried into cakes, strung into necklaces for storage, or boiled down into thick syrups. Some accounts mention them mixed with venison to make hearty travel rations. Nutritionally, they're tiny powerhouses, packed with antioxidants, vitamin C, and manganese. In fact, modern lab tests show they rival blueberries in disease-fighting compounds. Archaeologists discovered charred huckleberry seeds in cooking pits dating back over 2,000 years, proving their role in diets long before European contact. They were even fermented into beverages from light teas to stronger brews. By the 19th century, huckleberries became so popular that entire U.S. towns hosted summer festivals around them. Yet they nearly vanished with industrial farming, which favored easy-to-grow blueberries. Today, they survive mostly in the wild, waiting for foragers to rediscover them. 5. Lingonberry small, red, and tart. Lingonberries thrive where winters are brutal. Indigenous peoples across the Northern Hemisphere, including Inuit, Sami, and Cree, gathered them as essential winter food. Why? Because lingonberries don't spoil easily. Thanks to natural benzoic acid, they could be stored in water-filled containers for months without rotting, an ancient refrigerator trick. This meant vitamin C was available even in the darkest season, preventing scurvy. Northern tribes ate them raw, sweetened with honey, or mashed into fish stews and pemmican. Some dried them into thin sheets for storage, while others used the juice as medicine for urinary infections and digestive issues. European explorers quickly adopted them. In the 1700s, Swedish soldiers carried lingonberries on campaigns as rations. By the 1800s, Scandinavian cookbooks listed dozens of recipes, from jams to sauces. Today, lingonberry jam is an IKEA novelty, but for indigenous families, it was once a life-saving berry that bridged survival and taste. 4. Ground cherry picture. A tiny lantern glowing in the grass. That's a ground cherry. Wrapped in a papery husk like a lantern, the berry inside turns golden when ripe. Indigenous groups from the Great Lakes to the Southwest harvested them in late summer, often teaching children to watch for husks that had dried and fallen to the ground. The taste? Sweet tart, like pineapple crossed with vanilla, a flavor so unique early settlers compared it to exotic fruits they'd never seen before. Nutritionally, they pack a punch. Rich in vitamin A, C, and antioxidants. Native cooks crushed them into sauces, stewed them with meat, or ate them fresh by the handful. Ground cherries also served a medicinal role. The Cherokee used them for stomach troubles, while some Plains tribes brewed teas from their leaves. Seeds from archaeological sites in Illinois and Kansas show they were cultivated as far back as 1,000 years ago. Though nearly forgotten, these plants can thrive in poor soils with little care. Today, chefs rediscover them in chutneys, pies, and jams, proving this ancient fruit still has a place on our tables. 3. Squashberry/musaman. Now imagine a berry so sour your face puckers, yet so important entire northern diets depended on it. That's the squashberry. Growing across boreal forests of Canada and Alaska, it was a staple for Cree, Dean, and Inuit families. Eaten raw, it was sharp and tangy, but cooking transformed it. Tribes mashed squash berries into pemmican, simmered them into stews, or sweetened them with honey and birch syrup. Some families stored them in seal oil to last through the winter, an ingenious preservation method. Medicinally, squash berries were lifesavers. Decoctions treated colds, coughs, and fevers. Northern healers used bark tea for stomach pain, proving food and medicine blurred into one. Rich in vitamin C, these berries were shields against scurvy in the frozen north. Records from fur traders in the 1700s note barrels of squash berries traded alongside furs and fish. Their presence in multiple oral traditions shows they were more than food. They were survival insurance. Today, they're still gathered in remote villages, often made into jams or syrups. One taste carries both the bite of survival and the sweetness of memory. 2. Ground plum, buffalo plum. On the Great Plains, where summers burned hot and winters cut deep, food security often meant finding what grew underfoot. Enter the ground plum, a small fruit no bigger than a grape, 1.5 to 2.5 centimeters, but crucial to tribes like the Lakota, Omaha, and Pawnee. Growing low to the ground in clusters, these reddish-purple pods look like plums, hence the name, but they were actually part of the pea family. Their taste was mild, slightly sweet, and refreshing in dry grasslands where fresh fruit was scarce. Plains tribes ate them raw during harvests or dried them for trail food. Horses loved them too, which made ground plums a form of medicine and fodder combined. Historical records describe how women and children gathered baskets of ground plums in early summer, often before buffalo hunts. Nutritionally, they offered hydration, fiber, and trace minerals, life-saving when other fruits hadn't ripened yet. Archaeologists note their presence in campsites alongside chokecherries and buffalo berries, showing how they rounded out plains diets. Although overlooked today, ground plums represent the genius of foraging, knowing when and where to find food hidden in plain sight. 1. Pawpaw. Imagine America's tropical fruit growing in the Midwest. That's the pawpaw, the continent's largest native fruit, weighing up to a pound each. With custard-like yellow flesh tasting of banana, mango, and melon, it was once a staple from the Great Lakes to the south. Tribes like the Shawnee, Cherokee, and Iroquois cultivated pawpaw groves. Families ate the fruit fresh, dried slices for winter, or mashed it into breads. Its seeds and bark even held medicinal uses. George Washington reportedly enjoyed pawpaws chilled, and Lewis and Clark survived on them during their 1806 expedition when supplies ran out. Nutritionally, pawpaws outshine many supermarket fruits, nearly 3 times more vitamin C than apples, rich in magnesium, iron, and protein. A single tree could produce up to 30 pounds of fruit a season, making it a reliable food source. Despite this, pawpaws nearly vanished with industrial farming. They bruise easily, resist shipping, and prefer shady riverbanks over neat rows of fields. Yet their resilience and flavor make them a forgotten superfruit waiting for revival. History is full of foods we lost and wisdom we ignored. If you loved uncovering these forgotten fruits, there's more waiting. Watch our next video for hidden history, subscribe to never miss it, and let's keep these stories alive together.